The old ranch stood silent under the Montana sky, weathered boards and broken fences telling of 20 long years of abandonment. Alpha Apache pulled his truck to a stop, dust settling around him like memories. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel as he surveyed what remained of his family legacy. The main house still stood, defiant against time, but something else caught his eye. Fresh footprints leading to the barn, a lantern's warm glow visible through cracked wooden slats. Someone was here. Someone had been waiting. But who would wait 2 decades for a man everyone believed was dead? What secret could possibly be worth guarding for all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crunch of gravel beneath Alpha's boots echoed in the stillness as he approached the barn. A worn leather journal clutched in his hand, not the tarnished family portrait originally planned, felt heavy with the weight of unwritten history. This journal, with its cracked spine and water-stained pages, had been his silent companion during 20 years of exile. His fingers traced the weathered wood of the barn door, hesitating. The lantern light still flickered inside, casting dancing shadows through the gaps in the planks. Alpha inhaled deeply, the familiar scent of hay and earth filling his lungs. Some things never change. Hello? His voice sounded foreign, even to his own ears, rough from years of speaking to no one but himself. I'm coming in. The door creaked open to reveal emptiness. The lantern hung from a beam, swinging gently though there was no breeze. Whoever had been here was gone, but they hadn't left in a hurry. This had been deliberate, a message perhaps. Alpha placed the journal on a weathered workbench, his mind traveling back to that final day. The taste of blood in his mouth, the thunder of hooves, the crack of gunshots splitting the Montana air, the Blackwell boy crumpling to the ground, and the certain knowledge that Alpha had just become a murderer in the eyes of the county. I had no choice, he whispered to the empty barn. He remembered the frantic ride back to the ranch, Sarah's face pale with shock as she clutched their infant son. You have to go, she had insisted, already throwing supplies into a bag. They'll lynch you before sunrise. The Blackwells own the sheriff, he had argued, but Sarah was right. She always was. I'll settle things here, she had promised. Then we'll join you. 2 weeks. The cabin at Whitefish Lake. But they never came. After a month of waiting, Alpha had ventured into town in disguise, only to overhear that the Apache ranch had been found abandoned. His wife and child presumed dead, killed by the same man who murdered young Blackwell. The lie had driven him deeper into the wilderness, across state lines, eventually as far as Alaska. Only there, among people who didn't know his name or face, could he begin again. Not living, merely existing. Alpha moved deeper into the barn, running his hands along tools hung with precision on the walls. Someone had maintained this place. The roof was patched, the floor swept clean. This wasn't abandonment. This was preservation. In the corner, he spotted something that stopped his heart. A rocking horse, hand-carved from pine. He had made it for his son's first birthday, a birthday the boy had never reached, or so he'd believed. Alpha ran his fingers over the mane, finding it worn smooth, as if from years of use. Outside, Alpha couldn't bring himself to enter the main house. Instead, he circled it, studying broken windows and climbing roses that had long since gone wild, reclaiming walls with thorny determination. The porch swing still hung, listing to one side like a drunken sailor. He and Sarah had sat there summer evenings, watching heat lightning dance across distant mountains. As twilight deepened, Alpha returned to his truck, retrieving a bedroll and his rifle. The house could wait until morning. Some ghosts were best faced in daylight. He made camp in the bed of his pickup, staring up at stars unchanged by human tragedy. The journal lay beside him, its pages still blank after all these years. What could he have possibly written? Dear Sarah, today marks 5 years since I failed to protect you and our son. 10 years gone, and I still wake calling your name. Now the empty pages seemed like an accusation. Something had happened here, something that contradicted the story he'd built his exile around. The rocking horse, the maintained barn, the footprints, all suggested his family's story hadn't ended the day he fled. As sleep finally claimed him, Alpha's hand rested on the journal. Tomorrow, he would face the house and whatever truths it held. Tomorrow, he would begin to understand what had waited 20 years for his return. Dawn broke over the eastern ridge, painting the weathered ranch house in gold and amber. Alpha woke with the first light, a habit 20 years hadn't broken. For a moment, staring at the familiar silhouette of the mountains, he could almost believe he'd never left. The illusion shattered when he shifted, his bones protesting a night spent in the truck bed. No longer the young man who'd fled this land. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned that pain was just another companion. Alpha approached the main house as morning mist clung to the tall grass. The porch steps creaked beneath his weight. 1, 2, 3, then the solid thunk of the fourth, which had always been replaced with a thicker board after their cattle dog had crashed through the rotted one. Someone had maintained this detail, this small piece of history. The front door wasn't locked. It swung open with a familiar groan that echoed in Alpha's chest. The smell hit him first, dust and abandonment, yes, but underneath the faint trace of pine soap. Sarah had always made it herself, filling the house with its clean scent. The living room stood frozen in time, furniture draped with sheets like patient ghosts. Alpha pulled one cover away, sending dust motes dancing in the morning light. His father's armchair, still positioned to face the now cold fireplace. On the mantel, instead of the carved wooden wolf he'd expected, stood a small tin box. Tarnished and dented, but instantly recognizable, his grandfather's snuff box. Alpha hadn't seen it since he was a boy. His hands trembled slightly as he took it down, the weight of it familiar yet strange. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a baby tooth, small and yellowed with age, wrapped in a scrap of paper. Alpha unfolded the note with careful fingers. His first tooth. It came out while riding lightning. He was so proud. 7 years old today. The handwriting was Sarah's, unmistakable in its elegant precision. Alpha sank into his father's chair, the tin box cradled in his palms. 7 years old. Their son had lived to be 7. Perhaps longer. Lightning had been their gentlest mare. Alpha had trained her himself, anticipating the day his son would be old enough to ride. A day he'd believed would never come. He pocketed the tooth and continued his exploration. The kitchen remained largely intact. Cast iron pans hung in their places, the old wood stove squatting like a patient beast. The cupboards held canned goods, with labels faded beyond recognition. Alpha paused at the kitchen table, running his hand along the edge where he'd carved his and Sarah's initials on their first anniversary. The notch was still there, deepened as if someone had traced it repeatedly over the years, keeping the mark fresh. The narrow staircase to the second floor protested under his weight. Upstairs, the doors to 3 bedrooms stood closed, as if in accusation. Alpha hesitated outside what had been the nursery. 20 years ago, it had held only a handmade crib and a dresser, their son too young for much more. He pushed the door open. The room had evolved. A small bed against the wall, a child's desk beneath the window, shelves lined with books and small treasures, rocks, feathers, a collection of carved animals. Evidence of a childhood, evidence of years. Alpha moved to the desk, his breath shallow. Papers lay scattered across its surface, preserved like everything else in this mausoleum of memories. Schoolwork, a child's careful penmanship, practicing letters. Math problems solved with varying degrees of success. At the corner of the desk sat a clay jar, misshapen in the way of all children's first attempts at pottery. Painted across its surface in wobbly blue letters, "For Dad when he comes home." Alpha picked it up with reverent hands. Inside, folded carefully, was a child's drawing. A tall stick figure labeled Dad, a smaller one labeled Me, a house with a chimney puffing smoke. The sun smiling down on them. On the back, in Sarah's handwriting, "He still believes you'll return." So do I. September 9th, 2010, 5 years after he'd fled. 5 years they had waited, hoping. Alpha replaced the drawing with shaking hands. The morning light strengthened around him, illuminating a room that told a story he'd never imagined possible. His son had grown here, in this house Alpha had believed abandoned. He had lived, learned, hoped, and somewhere out there he might still be waiting. The growl of an approaching engine pulled Alpha from his reverie. He moved to the window, instinctively stepping to the side rather than standing directly in view. Old habits. The vehicle, a faded blue pickup nearly as weather-beaten as his own, rolled to a stop beside the barn. An old man emerged slowly, moving with the stiff deliberation of someone whose joints protested every motion. He wore overalls and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. Something about his posture struck Alpha as familiar. Minutes later, a knock rattled the front door. Alpha descended the stairs silently, positioning himself to the side before calling out, "Doors open!" The hinges creaked as the visitor entered cautiously. "Hello, Mrs. Apache sent me to check on—" The old man froze mid-sentence as Alpha stepped into view. The color drained from his sun-weathered face. "Sweet Jesus, it can't be. Jim?" Alpha recognized his former ranch hand, though the years had bent the once tall man nearly double. "Jim Tanner? They said you were dead." Jim's voice trembled, his hand clutching a worn brass pocket watch, not the maintenance ledger from the original plan. The watch caught the morning light, its engraved surface instantly familiar to Alpha. He had presented it to Jim for 10 years of loyal service, just months before everything fell apart. Not dead. "Just gone." Alpha gestured to the living room. "Sit before you fall down, old friend." Jim sank into a chair, still staring. 20 years, and you just walk back in like you stepped out for cigarettes. A note of accusation crept into his tone. Sarah waited. The boy waited. Alpha's breath caught. They lived then. Both of them. Jim's weathered face creased with surprise. "You didn't know? All this time you didn't know they survived?" "I was told they were dead." "That the Blackwells—" Alpha couldn't finish. Jim clutched the pocket watch tighter. "The Blackwells spread that story right enough. Said you'd killed them before running. But Sarah was tougher than 10 men put together. She kept this place going as long as she could. What happened to them, Jim?" The question felt like barbed wire in Alpha's throat. Jim's gaze dropped to the watch in his hands, his thumb absently tracing its engraved surface. "Sarah took sick 3 winters back. Nothing the doctors could do. The boy, he's a man now, he comes around sometimes. Keeps an eye on the place." The floor seemed to shift beneath Alpha's feet. "My son is alive," Jim nodded slowly. "Name's Michael. Goes by Mike. Sarah raised him right, taught him everything about ranching. Smart as a whip, that boy. Got his mother's determination and your stubborn streak." A faint smile crossed the old man's face. "And your eyes. Can't miss those Apache eyes." Alpha moved to the window, needing space to breathe. "Where is he now?" "Veterinary practice over in Clearwater County. Married a nice girl from Idaho. Got 2 little ones of his own." Jim hesitated. "He doesn't talk much about you. But he never sold this place, even when money got tight. Sarah made him promise." Alpha's throat tightened. "She knew I'd come back. She believed it longer than anyone." Jim's voice softened. "Every month, like clockwork, she'd light that lantern in the barn. Said you'd see it if you were watching from the hills. Even when she got too sick to walk out there herself, she'd send me." He held up the pocket watch. "Told me to keep time by this. Said it was important the light went on at sunset, not a minute later." The enormity of it all pressed down on Alpha's chest. 20 years of exile while his family waited. His wife's death. His son's life built without him. Grandchildren he'd never met. "Does he know I'm back?" Alpha asked. Jim shook his head. "Nobody knows except me, and I only know because I happened by. But folks in town will talk once they see you. News travels fast here, always did." Alpha nodded, decision forming. "I need to see him. Might not be that simple." Jim's fingers tightened around the brass watch. Boy grew up with questions nobody could answer. Why his daddy never came home. Why the Blackwells treated them like dirt. Sarah protected him from the worst of it, but... He trailed off. "But a boy needs his father," Alpha finished quietly. "Man needs answers," Jim corrected. "And you better have good ones." He stood slowly, returning the watch to his pocket. "I'll make a call. Not promising anything, but I'll let him know you're here. As Jim shuffled toward the door, he paused. "Alpha, whatever kept you away all these years?" "I hope it was worth losing them." The door closed behind him, leaving Alpha alone with a truth sharper than any knife. Nothing could have been worth such a cost. After Jim left, restlessness drove Alpha from the house. The walls seemed to press in, heavy with memories and accusations. He needed air, space, the boundless Montana sky above him, rather, than a ceiling weathered by 20 seasons without his care. He walked the perimeter of what had once been his proudest achievement, 1,000 acres of prime grazing land, natural springs, and timber that had been in the Apache family for 3 generations. His father had expanded it. Alpha had defended it. And in the end, he had abandoned it. His boots carried him to the western boundary, where Apache land met Blackwell territory. The disputed territory. The reason for everything. The old fence line was barely visible now, posts rotted or fallen, barbed wire rusted and sagging. But Alpha could trace its path from memory, could still see it standing straight and true in his mind's eye. Here was where it had happened, where everything had changed. Near a lightning-struck pine that still stood like a sentinel, Alpha knelt, brushing away years of fallen needles and debris. Instead of the bullet-scarred fence post he'd expected to find, his fingers discovered a small stone marker, rough-hewn and partially sunken into the earth. No name graced its surface, only a date carved with crude tools. June 17th, 2005, 5 years after he'd fled. Alpha traced the numbers, confusion furrowing his brow. The Blackwell boy hadn't died that day 20 years ago. Alpha had learned that much during his exile. The shot had wounded, not killed. So whose marker was this? Who had been buried here, on the very spot where Alpha's life had unraveled? He noticed something catching the sunlight nearby. Brushing aside more pine needles, he uncovered a tarnished silver belt buckle, its surface engraved with a stallion in mid-rear. Alpha's breath caught. He recognized it immediately. It had been his father's, then his. He'd been wearing it the day he fled. Alpha sat back on his heels, the belt buckle heavy in his palm. He'd assumed it lost during his frantic escape. How had it ended up here, buried beside this mysterious marker? As he turned it over, he noticed something had been scratched into the back, crude letters that hadn't been there before. Truth North, the North Pasture, the furthest corner of Apache land, where the property backed up against national forest. What truth waited there? Alpha pocketed the buckle and rose, his decision made. But as he turned to head north, movement caught his eye across the boundary line. A figure on horseback watched from the distant ridge, too far to identify, but close enough to recognize Alpha's presence. Blackwell land. Blackwell eyes, Alpha didn't wave or acknowledge the watcher. Instead, he turned deliberately and began walking north, following the overgrown path that would lead to the north pasture. He could feel eyes on his back the entire way. The journey took longer than it once had. Trails that had been kept clear in his day were now choked with underbrush. Fallen trees blocked direct routes, forcing detours. Alpha's body, no longer young, protested the rugged terrain. By the time the north pasture came into view, afternoon shadows had lengthened across the land. The pasture itself was still clear. Natural grassland that resisted the encroachment of forest. In Alpha's time, it had been used for summer grazing. Now it stood empty, tall grasses waving in the mountain breeze. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then at the far edge where pasture met forest, a glint of something man-made caught his eye. Alpha crossed the field, moving more quickly now. As he drew closer, the structure took form. A small cabin, built of rough-hewn logs and partially hidden among the trees. It hadn't been there 20 years ago. Outside the cabin door stood a split-log bench, and atop it sat a mason jar. Alpha approached cautiously, every sense alert. The jar contained what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. He removed the lid and extracted the note. The handwriting was unfamiliar, not Sarah's elegant script, but a man's blocky letters. "I knew you'd come back someday. I've been waiting. Not here now, but I'll know when you find this. The truth about that day is in the strongbox under the floorboards. The combination is your son's birthday, Alpha stared at the words, a chill running down his spine despite the afternoon warmth. Someone had anticipated his return. Someone had left evidence waiting. Someone knew what had really happened 20 years ago. With one last glance toward the distant figure still watching from Blackwell Land, Alpha pushed open the cabin door. The cabin's interior lay in dusty half-light, sunbeams cutting through small windows to illuminate dancing particles. A single room with sparse furnishings, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough-hewn table and chair, a cast-iron stove in the corner. This was no vacation retreat, but a functional shelter, a place of waiting. Alpha moved cautiously, scanning for traps or signs of recent occupation. The layer of dust suggested weeks, perhaps months, since anyone had been here. Yet nothing felt abandoned. Rather, it seemed paused, expectant. On the table sat a faded Polaroid photograph, not the toy revolver from the original plan. Alpha picked it up, breath-catching. The image showed Sarah, perhaps 10 years after he'd left, sitting on the ranch house porch. Beside her stood a teenage boy, with Alpha's jawline and Sarah's gentle eyes. They weren't posed or smiling. It appeared taken without their knowledge, Sarah gazing toward the mountains, the boy reading a book in his lap. Alpha slipped the photo into his shirt pocket. Close to his heart, the note had mentioned floorboards. He knelt, running calloused hands across the rough planks until he found one that shifted slightly under pressure. Using his pocket knife, Alpha pried it up to reveal a cavity beneath. Inside waited a metal strongbox, small but solid. Old memories surfaced. His son's birthday, April 12th. Alpha turned the combination lock, 41200. The mechanism clicked, but didn't open. He paused, reconsidering. Perhaps the year was needed. He tried again, 41205. Nothing. Alpha closed his eyes, thinking of the boy in the photograph. If the note writer meant his full birth date, he dialed 4 to 12005. The lock surrendered with a satisfying click. Inside lay a weathered leather-bound book, a diary. On its cover, embossed in simple gold lettering, Sarah Apache. Alpha's hands trembled as he opened it, his wife's voice seeming to fill the cabin as he read, June 18th, 2005. Yesterday marked 5 years since Alpha left us. 5 years of waiting, wondering, hoping. Sheriff Blackwell came by again, asking questions about Alpha's whereabouts. I told him the same truth I always do, that I haven't heard from my husband. What I didn't say is that I still believe he'll return. Something happened yesterday that changes everything. Old man Blackwell died, not peacefully in his sleep as the town will be told, but raving with fever and guilt. Pastor Collins was with him at the end and came directly to me afterward. In his delirium, Blackwell confessed. The cattle rustling, the accusations against Alpha, all fabricated. They wanted our water rights, the North Pasture Spring that feeds both properties. They knew Alpha wouldn't sell, so they created a situation to drive him away or have him imprisoned. The shooting wasn't as it seemed. Jacob Blackwell wore a blood pack provided by his father. The mortal wound Alpha thought he'd inflicted was staged. They never imagined Alpha would flee rather than stand his ground. By the time they realized he was gone, it was too late to undo the deception without exposing their own crimes. Pastor Collins has written down the confession and secured it with his attorney. We finally have proof of Alpha's innocence, but no way to tell him. Where are you, my love? How do I find you to bring you home? Alpha turned pages with reverent care, reading entries that spanned years. Sarah documenting their son's growth, her efforts to maintain the ranch, her steadfast belief that Alpha would return. The gradual gathering of evidence against the Blackwells. Her declining health in later entries. The final page, dated just 4 years ago, was written in a shaky hand. Michael knows everything now. He's promised to maintain the signal lantern, to keep the ranch, to wait as I have waited. My son has become a good man without his father's guidance. But I see Alpha in him every day. His sense of justice, his gentle strength, his loyalty to this land and our name. If you find this, my love, know that we never stopped waiting. Know that you have a son to be proud of. Know that the truth has been preserved, waiting for your return. Find Michael. Tell him his mother kept her promise? Alpha closed the diary, his vision blurred. Outside, the sun had begun its descent behind the mountains. Soon darkness would fall. In the gathering dusk, he could make out the distant shape of the main house, and there in the barn window, the faint glow of a newly lit lantern. Someone was signaling. Someone was still waiting. It was time to answer. Alpha returned to the main house as night fell, Sarah's diary secure in his jacket pocket. The weight of it pressed against his ribs like a second heart. 20 years of waiting, documented in his wife's faithful hand. 20 years he could never reclaim. The lantern in the barn still glowed, its light a beacon through the darkness. Alpha approached it cautiously, but found only emptiness inside. Whoever had lit it was gone again, a ghost keeper of a promise made long ago. He built a small fire in the living room hearth, the first to burn therein who knew how long. As flames cast dancing shadows across the walls, Alpha read more of Sarah's entries, piecing together the life he'd missed. Their son's first steps, school achievements, the gradual revelation of the Blackwells' deception. Sarah's illness, beginning as a persistent cough and ending 3 years ago, with her peaceful passing in the same bedroom where their child had been born. Sleep eluded him. Around midnight, he stepped onto the porch, gazing at stars so bright and close they seemed almost within reach. The Montana night embraced him like an old friend who had never forgotten his face. The distant rumble of an engine broke the stillness. Headlights cut through darkness, moving up the long driveway with deliberate slowness. Alpha stepped back into shadow, hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. The vehicle, a county sheriff's SUV, rolled to a stop beside Alpha's truck. The headlights remained on, illuminating the yard in harsh white light. A tall figure emerged, silhouetted against the glare. "I know you're there." "Apache!" The voice was younger than Alpha had expected, but it carried the same entitled drawl that had characterized the Blackwell family for generations. "Step out where I can see you." Alpha remained in shadow. "You're trespassing on private property, officer." "It's Sheriff now." "Sheriff Wade Blackwell." There was a pause as the man adjusted his hat, a deliberate gesture that reminded Alpha painfully of Old Man Blackwell. "And legally speaking, this property's ownership is complicated." Alpha finally stepped into the light. "Nothing complicated about it. This land belongs to the Apache family. Always has." Sheriff Blackwell was perhaps 40, with his father's height and his grandfather's cold eyes. He wore his uniform like armor, and his authority like a birthright. At his hip, not just a standard service weapon, but an ornate pistol with carved ivory grips, a Blackwell family heirloom that couldn't possibly be department-issued. Well, the younger man looked Alpha up and down. "The ghost himself, back from the dead. You've got the whole town talking. 20 years is a long time to be gone, Apache." "Not long enough for some," Alpha replied evenly. The sheriff smirked. "They told me you had a mouth on you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew not a badge but a silver dollar coin, worn smooth around the edges. He flipped it casually, catching it with practiced ease. "My father gave me this the day they ran you off. Said a man who abandons his family isn't worth more than the silver in this dollar." Alpha recognized the coin, a Morgan silver dollar, minted in 1878. His grandfather had carried it as a good luck charm through 2 wars before passing it to Alpha's father, who had given it to Alpha on his 18th birthday. "It had been in his pocket the day everything went wrong." "That doesn't belong to you," Alpha said quietly. "Possession is 9/10 of the law." The sheriff pocketed the coin. "Speaking of which, I'm here about this property. County records show back taxes owing. Quite a sum after 20 years. My wife maintained the payments. I've seen the records." Something flickered across the sheriff's face, surprise quickly masked. "Your wife has been dead 3 years. The grace period expires next month. My son has made some token payments, sure." The sheriff circled Alpha's truck, running a finger along its dusty hood. "But nowhere near what's required to clear the debt. I'll be back with official papers. This land will be auctioned, as it should have been years ago." Alpha stepped forward. "This is about the water rights. Still fighting your grandfather's battles? The sheriff's hand drifted toward his weapon. Careful, old man. Some might say you're threatening an officer, just stating facts. The Blackwells have wanted the North Pasture Spring for 50 years. Water rights, mineral rights. What difference does it make now? The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. You ran once. My advice, run again. There's nothing for you here but bad memories and complications. He turned back toward his vehicle, then paused. One more thing, just so we're clear. Statute of limitations might have expired on the shooting, but not on fleeing justice or crossing state lines. I find one single reason to bring you in. I will. Alpha watched silently as the sheriff drove away, taillights receding into darkness. The silver dollar, his family's legacy, gone with him. Another piece of history stolen by the Blackwells, but not the most important piece. That remained intact. The truth. And somewhere, a son who had never stopped waiting. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, haunted by the sheriff's visit and the weight of Sarah's diary. By dawn, Alpha had made a decision. If answers existed about his son's current life, they would be in the master bedroom, the one place he'd avoided since his return. The room remained largely as he remembered. The four-poster bed Sarah had inherited from her grandmother, the patchwork quilt they'd received as a wedding gift, the oak dresser Alpha had crafted during their first winter together. What differed were the subtle signs of a solitary life. A single depression in the mattress, books stacked on what had been Alpha's nightstand, a collection of medicine bottles on the dresser. Sarah had lived here alone for nearly 2 decades, keeping faith with a ghost. Alpha ran his hand along the edges of the wooden floorboards beside the bed. The third one had always been loose. They'd used the space beneath to hide emergency cash. His fingers found the familiar groove and lifted. Instead of cash, he discovered a wooden cigar box, not the bundle of letters from the original plan. The box was Spanish cedar, its lid adorned with a hand-painted landscape of rolling Montana hills. Alpha had bought it on their 5th anniversary, the last one before everything fell apart. Inside, organized with Sarah's characteristic precision, lay a collection of small items. A child's crayon drawing signed Michael, age 6. A pressed wildflower. Alpha's wedding band, which he'd left behind in his haste to flee. And an envelope addressed simply, "For his return." Alpha opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Sarah's handwriting. My dearest Alpha, if you're reading this, I've kept my promise. Our home has remained yours, waiting for the day you would find your way back. I wish I could be there to see your face, to touch you once more, to introduce you to the fine man our son has become. I've never believed you abandoned us willingly. Something terrible must have kept you away. I've spent 20 years collecting evidence of the Blackwells' deception, proving your innocence to anyone who would listen, and to Michael most of all. Our son deserves to know his father. He has your spirit, your integrity, your hands that can build anything they touch. He's become a healer, a veterinarian with a practice in Clearwater. He married Julia Winters 5 years ago. They have twin girls, Emma and Sarah. Yes, my love, you are a grandfather. What you must know, Michael lights the lantern every Sunday evening, continuing what I began. He's never given up hope, though the years have hardened something in him. He needs answers only you can provide. Find him at the clinic in Millwood. Tell him I kept my word. Tell him I never lost faith in his father. All my love across the years, Sarah. Alpha folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope. Grandchildren. 2 little girls he'd never seen. A daughter-in-law he'd never met. A son who still lit the lantern but needed answers. He continued searching the room, looking for anything else Sarah might have left. In the closet, he found a row of men's shirts, too small to have been his, too large to belong to a child. Michael's, then. Evidence he'd spent time here as an adult, caring for his mother during her illness. On a high shelf, pushed to the back, Alpha discovered a leather document case. Inside were property tax receipts, carefully organized by year. Some were marked with Sarah's signature, the later ones with Michael's. The most recent was dated just 2 months ago. Despite what Sheriff Blackwell had claimed, the taxes had been paid. Not in full, perhaps, but regularly enough to prevent foreclosure. Another Blackwell lie. Beneath the receipts lay a sealed envelope addressed to the county records office with Michael's return address. Alpha hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside was a legal letter requesting clarification on alleged back taxes, along with copies of payment receipts spanning 20 years. It was dated the previous week, but never mailed. Michael was already challenging the Blackwells' claims. Like his mother, he was fighting to protect the ranch. Alpha replaced the documents, his resolve hardening. 20 years ago, he'd run to protect his family, believing they would be safer without him drawing the Blackwells' wrath. He'd been wrong. Sarah and Michael had faced that wrath alone, standing their ground when he had not. He wouldn't run again. Not from the Blackwells, not from the truth, and certainly not from the son who deserved to know his father had finally come home. Alpha checked his watch. 9:30. If Michael maintained a traditional veterinary practice, he'd be starting his morning appointments in Millwood, just 30 minutes away. It was time to meet his son. Alpha showered and changed into the cleanest clothes he had, a faded flannel shirt and jeans worn soft with age. Looking in the bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the weathered face staring back, silver hair where dark had been, lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much. Would his son see anything of the father who had left so long ago? The drive to Millwood took him through once familiar territory, now altered by time. New houses dotted what had been open ranch land. The old general store had transformed into a tourist shop, selling Montana souvenirs. Only the mountains remained unchanged, eternal witnesses to human dramas played out in their shadows. Alpha stopped at Maggie's diner on the edge of town, needing coffee and time to organize his thoughts before seeking out Michael's veterinary practice. The bell above the door announced his entry, and for a moment all conversations stopped as patrons looked up to assess the newcomer. Millwood had always been small enough that strangers were noticed. Alpha kept his head down, sliding into a booth near the back. But he felt the stares, the whispers. Did they recognize him or merely sense an outsider? A waitress approached, young, probably born after he'd left. "Coffee?" Alpha nodded. "And whatever breakfast special you're serving." As she turned to place his order, Alpha's gaze drifted to the wall beside the register. Instead of the newspaper clippings he'd expected, a large wood-carved map of Millwood County dominated the space. Hand-painted and meticulously detailed, it showed ranches, waterways, and landmarks, each labeled in careful script. In the corner, the artist had signed it. M. Apache 2019, his son's work. Alpha stared at the signature, momentarily forgetting where he was. "It's something, isn't it?" The waitress had returned with his coffee. "Dr. Apache made that for the diner's 40th anniversary. Man's got real talent with his hands." Alpha cleared his throat. "You know him well?" "Everyone knows Doc Apache," she shrugged. "Fixes up all the animals around here. Good man. Quiet, though. Keeps to himself mostly, except when his girls come in for ice cream." His daughters. Cutest twins you ever saw. She smiled. They got his eyes, unusual color, like amber almost. Alpha's eyes, his father's eyes, the Apache eyes that had passed down through generations. "Is his practice far from here?" Alpha asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just down Main Street, the white building with green shutters." She hesitated, studying him more carefully. "You got business with Doc?" "Old acquaintance," Alpha murmured, neither truth nor lie. She nodded slowly. "Well, you won't catch him there now. Thursday mornings he's always at the Blackwell estate, tending their horses." Alpha's cup paused halfway to his lips. "Blackwell, Sheriff's family owns the biggest spread around here now." She lowered her voice. Folks think it's strange, Doc Apache working for them considering the history. But he says sick animals don't care about human feuds. Before Alpha could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. The waitress glanced over, her expression changing. Speaking of, Sheriff Wade Blackwell strode in, uniform crisp, presence commanding immediate attention. Unlike last night, he wore a smile, the public face of authority. He nodded to several patrons, exchanged pleasantries with the cook, then turned toward the back of the diner, his eyes locked with Alpha's. The smile faltered, then hardened into something more deliberate. Well, look who's getting reacquainted with local cuisine. Blackwell approached Alpha's booth, resting one hand casually on his holstered weapon. I'd have thought you'd be halfway to Canada by now. Sorry to disappoint. Alpha sipped his coffee, deliberately calm. The sheriff slid into the seat opposite, uninvited. Let's not make this difficult, Apache. The county's changed. Your kind of justice doesn't work here anymore. My kind, the kind that involves taking matters into your own hands. Blackwell leaned forward. I've got a town to protect. From what? A man reclaiming his own property? Blackwell's voice dropped. From a fugitive with a history of violence who abandoned his family and now returns just when the property's mineral rights are becoming valuable. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Alpha set down his cup. Mineral rights? Something flashed across the sheriff's face. Calculation, perhaps regret at revealing too much. He recovered quickly. Stay away from Michael Apache and his family. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're owed, it's not worth what I'll bring down on you. He stood, adjusting his hat. Enjoy your breakfast. It might be the last peaceful meal you get in Millwood. As Blackwell exited, conversations gradually resumed. The waitress returned with Alpha's food, avoiding his eyes. Something wrong with the sheriff's horses? Alpha asked. She glanced toward the door. Nothing regular. Sheriff just keeps finding reasons to have Doc Apache out there. Some say he's sweet on Doc's wife. Others think he's just keeping enemies closer than friends. Alpha stared at his son's carved map, noting how the Apache ranch bordered Blackwell land, and how a thin blue line representing the disputed spring water crossed both properties. Some conflicts, it seemed, survived even 20 years of absence. After finishing his breakfast, Alpha left cash on the table and departed before the sheriff might return. The mention of mineral rights gnawed at him. What had been discovered on Apache land during his absence? Whatever it was, it explained the renewed Blackwell interest in a property they'd spent decades trying to acquire. Instead of heading directly to Michael's veterinary practice, Alpha drove to the outskirts of town. There, in a modest neighborhood of single-story homes with generous yards, he found the address he sought, 1420 Pine Road. According to Sarah's diary, this had been the home of Luis Ramirez, his most trusted ranch hand and friend. The small house appeared well-maintained, with a vegetable garden flourishing in the side yard. A weather-beaten pickup truck sat in the driveway, the same one Luis had driven 20 years ago, miraculously still running. Alpha knocked on the door, heart pounding. What if Luis no longer lived here? What if he refused to speak with the man who had disappeared without a word? The door opened to reveal a man in his 70s, stooped but still recognizably Luis. His weathered face registered shock, then disbelief. Madre de Dios, he whispered. Alpha? Hello, old friend. Luis crossed himself, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Not here, he said quietly. My grandson's inside. We'll talk in the garden. Alpha followed him to a wooden bench nestled among tomato plants. Luis moved stiffly, favoring his right leg, an old injury from a fall during roundup decades ago. Sarah always said you would come back, Luis said once they were seated. I stopped believing her after the first 10 years. I thought she was dead, Alpha explained. Both of them. The Blackwells spread the story that you killed them before running. Luis nodded. I never believed that part. I knew you'd never harm them. But leaving them? He shrugged. That was harder to understand. I thought I was protecting them. If the Blackwells were after me for shooting Jacob—" Luis pulled a worn copper flask from his pocket, not the old ledger of debts from the original plan. Alpha recognized it immediately. He had given it to Luis on the day his daughter was born, filled with fine whiskey to celebrate. Now Luis offered it to him. "Still keep it filled," Luis said. "Old habits." Alpha took a small swallow, the familiar burn traveling down his throat. "Tell me about them, Luis." "After I left," Luis reclaimed the flask, turning it in his gnarled hands. The Apache cattle brand was still visible on its surface, though worn by years of handling. "Sarah was the strongest woman I ever knew. When the Blackwells started the rumor that you'd killed your family, she marched into town with baby Michael in her arms, stood in the middle of Main Street, and told everyone they could see for themselves that she was very much alive." He took a drink. "She kept the ranch going for years. Sold off cattle when necessary, but never more than she had to. Kept a core group of us employed, me, Jim Tanner, old Peterson. Paid fair wages even when she could barely afford it." Luis smiled faintly. "She raised that boy right, taught him everything about ranching alongside his schooling. By 15, Michael could run the operation without her, yet he became a veterinarian." Luis nodded. "Sarah insisted he get an education. Said he could always ranch, but should have choices you and she never had. He got a scholarship to Montana State. Met Julia there, smart girl, studying to be a teacher. They married right after graduation, and the twins? 6 years old now. Little hellions, those two." Luis chuckled. "Emma's the leader, Sarah's the thinker. They've got the Apache spirit, that's certain. Do they know about me?" Luis's expression sobered. "Michael doesn't talk about you much. Not to me, anyway. But Sarah, she always told the boy stories. Made sure he knew his father was a good man, caught in a bad situation. And the Blackwells? Why is Michael working for them?" Luis's fingers tightened around the flask. "Complicated. When the mineral survey showed natural gas deposits under both properties 3 years ago, things changed. The Blackwells needed access rights that only Michael could grant. Instead of strong-arming like old man Blackwell would have done, Sheriff Wade tried charm. Hired Michael as their vet, invited the family to gatherings, acted like the bad blood was ancient history. But the taxes, another Blackwell game. They've got someone in the county office marking payments as insufficient, creating a paper trail for eventual seizure." Luis handed the flask back to Alpha. "Michael's been fighting it, but quietly. Doesn't want trouble for his family. And my son. What kind of man is he?" Luis studied Alpha thoughtfully. "Cautious, principled. Doesn't forgive easily, but loyal to his core. Like his father." He paused. "He deserves to hear the truth from you, Alpha. Why you never came back. Why you never tried to find them." "I did try," Alpha protested. "The first year I came back in disguise. Heard they were dead, and you believed it without proof? Without seeing graves?" Luis's voice held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. Alpha had no answer. The truth was too painful. He had accepted their deaths too easily, perhaps because living with the alternative was harder. Believing they were gone had allowed him to build a new life, however empty. Luis rose slowly. "There's something you should see before you meet him. Storage unit on Highway 12, number 33. Keys under the left front tire of the truck." He glanced toward his house. "Go now. My grandson will be wondering who's keeping his abuelo so long." Alpha stood. "Thank you, Luis," the old ranch hand nodded. "Don't thank me yet. 20 years leaves deep wounds, amigo. Be prepared for whatever reception you get." Highway 12 curved along the foothills, offering glimpses of the valley where Millwood nestled. Alpha drove slowly, his mind filled with Luis's revelations. Natural gas deposits. The Blackwells using charm instead of force. His son, a veterinarian who still maintained the ranch that should have been his birthright. The storage facility appeared around a bend, a series of identical metal units with orange doors, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Alpha found Unit 33 at the far end of the complex, partially hidden by overgrown junipers. As promised, a key waited beneath Luis's truck tire. The lock turned with a reluctant click. Alpha raised the rolling door to reveal a space crowded with furniture and boxes, pieces of the Apache family history, preserved like artifacts in a museum. The air held the musty scent of things long undisturbed. In the center, draped with a protective cloth, stood Sarah's upright piano. Alpha removed the cover carefully. The instrument gleamed with polish, clearly maintained despite its storage. On the music stand, not the legal deed from the original plan, lay a small digital recorder, its red light blinking to indicate stored content. Alpha pressed play, half expecting Sarah's voice. Instead, he heard a man speaking, his son, Michael, his voice a deeper version of Alpha's own. Final addition to the evidence file. October 2022, conversation with Wade Blackwell regarding tax discrepancies. Recording made under Montana. Single-party consent law. What followed was a carefully orchestrated conversation in which Sheriff Blackwell gradually revealed the family's true intentions for the Apache property. The natural gas deposits, development plans requiring full control of the water rights, veiled threats about consequences if Michael didn't cooperate. Your mother was stubborn right to the end, the sheriff's recorded voice said. You don't have to make the same mistake. My family can be generous to those who work with us, or we can be persistent with those who don't. Michael's response was measured but firm. My mother taught me the value of this land goes beyond money, Sheriff. Some things aren't for sale. Alpha listened, pride swelling. His son had inherited Sarah's steel spine along with the Apache eyes. The recording ended. Alpha rewound and listened again, hearing nuances he'd missed. The sheriff's careful avoidance of explicit threats. Michael's strategic questions drawing out admissions. This wasn't just evidence, it was a masterfully executed trap. Alpha continued exploring the unit. In the filing cabinet, he found folders documenting 20 years of Blackwell maneuvers to acquire the Apache ranch. Lowball offers, manufactured tax problems, attempts to divert the spring water, all meticulously recorded by Sarah and later Michael. On a workbench along one wall sat an opened package addressed to the State Attorney General's office. Inside was a USB drive labeled Blackwell Evidence and a cover letter in Michael's handwriting, detailing the family's pattern of corruption and intimidation. The letter was dated the previous week but remained unmailed. Something had interrupted Michael's plans to seek legal intervention. Alpha's exploration was halted by the sound of tires on gravel outside. A vehicle had pulled up. Silently, he moved to the partially open door, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. A forest green SUV had parked beside his truck. The driver remained inside, engine running. Through the windshield, Alpha glimpsed a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She appeared to be in her 30s, attractive in an understated way, with intelligent eyes that surveyed the surroundings carefully before she emerged from the vehicle. She approached the storage unit with purpose, keys in hand. Alpha stepped back into shadow, weighing his options. Confront her? Hide? Too late for either. She paused at the threshold, registering the open door and his presence inside. Who's there? Her voice was steady, betraying only slight apprehension. This unit belongs to the Apache family. You're trespassing. Alpha stepped forward slowly, hands visible. I am Alpha Apache. Her eyes widened, taking in his features with dawning recognition. She didn't flee or call out. Instead, she studied him with an intensity that suggested she was comparing his face to one she knew well. You're Michael's father, she said finally. Not a question, yes, and you would be? Julia Apache. She straightened slightly. Your daughter-in-law. For a moment, neither spoke. Alpha saw no fear in her eyes, only cautious assessment. This woman was evaluating him, determining whether he posed a threat to her family. Luis told you about this place, she said, glancing past him at the recorder. You've heard the evidence, Alpha nodded. Against the Blackwells. Michael's been building a case. We both have. Julia remained in the doorway, maintaining distance. What I need to know is why you've returned now, after all this time. What do you want from my husband? The question deserved honesty. I didn't know he was alive until 2 days ago. I believed the Blackwells' lie that Sarah and Michael died after I left. Julia's expression softened fractionally. Sarah always said there had to be a reason you never came back. She never stopped believing in you. She paused. Michael stopped believing a long time ago. I need to see him, Alpha said. To explain. Yes, you do. Julia finally stepped inside, closing the door partially behind her. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're walking into. Julia insisted on driving separately, leading Alpha through the back roads of Millwood County. Sheriff Blackwell has deputies watching Michael's clinic today, she explained, before they left the storage facility. Something's made him nervous. Probably you. Alpha followed her forest green SUV, noting how she took a circuitous route that avoided main streets. Clearly, the Blackwells' surveillance was a familiar concern to Michael's family. They arrived at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, a white clapboard building on the outskirts of town. The gravel parking lot was empty, except for a black sedan parked beside the small parish house. Pastor Collins has been our ally for years, Julia said as they approached the church steps. He heard old man Blackwell's deathbed confession. He's the only one besides family who knows the whole story. The church interior was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through stained glass to cast colored patterns across worn wooden pews. Julia led Alpha to a side door that opened into a small study lined with books. Behind a simple desk sat a man in his 70s, white-haired and bespectacled. Writing in what appeared to be a sermon journal, Pastor Collins looked up, his pen freezing mid-sentence as he registered Alpha's presence. "Good Lord," he whispered. "It's really you," Pastor, Alpha acknowledged. "I understand you knew my wife, knew her, counseled her, and promised her I'd help if you ever returned." The pastor stood, extending his hand. "She never lost faith, Mr. Apache." Alpha shook the offered hand. "So I've been told, repeatedly, because it matters." Pastor Collins gestured for them to sit. "Faith sustained Sarah through 20 difficult years. Faith in God, yes, but also faith in you. Faith I didn't earn," Alpha said quietly. The pastor studied him. "Perhaps not. But Sarah believed your absence was involuntary, that you were either prevented from returning or deceived into staying away." Julia leaned forward. "We need your help, Pastor. He needs to understand before he sees Michael." Collins nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, context is important." He opened his desk drawer and removed a worn leather Bible, not the baptismal record from the original plan. When he set it on the desk, Alpha noticed a name embossed in faded gold letters on the cover, Sarah Elizabeth Apache. "Your wife left this with me before she passed," Pastor Collins explained. "She asked me to keep it safe until either you returned or Michael was ready to know everything." He opened the Bible carefully. To wear a ribbon marked a passage in Psalms. Tucked between the pages was a small key attached to a faded photograph. The image showed a much younger Pastor Collins standing beside Sarah, who held an infant swaddled in a white christening gown. Behind them stood a baptismal font, and in Sarah's free hand she clutched this very Bible. "Michael's christening," Collins explained. 6 months after you disappeared. Sarah insisted on proceeding with the ceremony despite everything. She wanted God's protection for your son in your absence. Alpha touched the photograph gently. "And the key?" "To the church's safe deposit box at Millwood Community Bank. It contains old man Blackwell's sworn statement about what really happened 20 years ago. His confession was witnessed by myself and the county judge, a man beyond Blackwell influence. The judge sealed the document until such time as you returned, or Michael decided to use it." "Why hasn't Michael used it?" Alpha asked. "It would clear my name." Julia and Pastor Collins exchanged glances. "The document doesn't just exonerate you," Julia said carefully. "It implicates current officials, including Sheriff Wade Blackwell, in an ongoing conspiracy. Making it public would bring repercussions that Michael has been reluctant to trigger. For his family's sake," Alpha surmised. Glancing at Julia, she nodded. "We have the twins to consider. And the ranch, it's still in legal jeopardy despite our efforts. But there's more to Michael's hesitation, Pastor Collins added. Opening that box means finally accepting that you're never coming back, that clearing your name falls to him. He's been conflicted about taking that step. Conflicted how? Alpha asked. Julia's expression softened. Part of him still hoped you'd return and fight your own battle. The little boy who waited for his father never completely disappeared. Pastor Collins handed Sarah's Bible to Alpha. She would want you to have this now. The passages she marked might help you understand the journey she and your son have traveled. Alpha accepted the Bible, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic. Where is Michael now? I need to see him. At the clinic, Julia said. He's performing surgery this afternoon. She checked her watch. He should be finishing soon. I can take you there, but... She hesitated. But what? You need to be prepared. Michael isn't Sarah. He doesn't share her unquestioning faith in your character or your reasons for staying away. Julia's eyes held a protective warning. He may not welcome you with open arms. I don't expect him to, Alpha replied honestly. Then what do you expect? Pastor Collins asked. Alpha considered the question, turning Sarah's Bible in his hands. A chance to tell the truth, and maybe, if I'm fortunate, a chance to know my son, Pastor Collins nodded solemnly. Truth has always been in short supply where the Blackwells are concerned. Speaking it now may have consequences beyond reconciliation. I'm aware of that, Alpha said. Are you? Julia challenged. The Blackwells have spent 20 years building their power in this county. They won't relinquish it easily, even in the face of truth. Then it's time they faced something else as well, Alpha said, rising from his chair. Justice is long overdue in Millwood County. As they prepared to leave the church, Pastor Collins's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened to the caller. I understand. Yes, we'll wait. He set the phone down with careful deliberation. That was Michael. He saw the sheriff's patrol car parked outside his clinic. He thinks they're watching for you. He looked at Alpha. He's coming here instead. Alpha's heart hammered against his ribs. After 20 years, his son was minutes away. He knows I'm here? Julia texted him, Pastor Collins said. He deserves the choice of whether to meet you or not. The waiting stretched like an eternity. Julia paced the small office while Pastor Collins thumbed through his sermon notes, occasionally glancing at Alpha, who remained motionless in his chair. Sarah's Bible cradled in his calloused hands. Finally, the sound of tires on gravel. A door opening and closing. Footsteps on the wooden church floor. The office door swung open. Michael Apache filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with Sarah's gentler features softening the hard Apache jaw. His dark hair was cut short, practical for his profession. He wore surgical scrubs under a light jacket, evidence of coming directly from the clinic. But it was his eyes that struck Alpha most forcefully, his own eyes looking back at him, amber-flecked and penetrating, now filled with a storm of emotions too complex to name. For a long moment no one spoke. Pastor Collins and Julia seemed to fade into the background as father and son faced each other across 20 years of absence. Michael broke the silence. I expected you to be older. Time passes differently in exile, Alpha replied softly. Michael entered the room fully, closing the door behind him. From his pocket he withdrew not a badge, but a tarnished brass key with an unusual double-bit design. He placed it on the pastor's desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. This was in our mailbox this morning. No note, no explanation. Michael's voice betrayed no emotion. It's the key to the old sheriff's evidence locker, the one decommissioned when Wade Blackwell modernized the department. Alpha recognized the key instantly. In his previous life as a deputy sheriff, before he'd returned to ranching, he'd used one just like it daily. Keys like this were strictly controlled. Only law enforcement personnel would have access. Someone sending you a message, Alpha observed. Not someone, you. Michael's accusation hung in the air. You return to town and suddenly this key appears? The timing isn't coincidental. Alpha shook his head. I had nothing to do with this. I didn't even know you were alive until 2 days ago. Michael's expression hardened in disbelief. 20 years, and that's the story you're going with? That you thought we were dead? It's the truth. Truth. Michael spat the word like a curse. The Blackwell said you killed us. Then they said you abandoned us. Now you say you thought we were dead. Everyone has their version of truth in Millwood County. Julia moved to her husband's side, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Michael, listen to him. Michael's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, waiting. Alpha chose his words carefully. After I fled, I tried to contact your mother. Letters came back undelivered. When I finally risked returning, I heard in town that you had both been killed, supposedly by me before I ran. I believed it because he hesitated, facing the most painful truth. Because it was easier than believing I'd truly abandoned you both. So you never looked for graves? Never demanded proof? Michael's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. I was a fugitive accused of murder. I couldn't exactly march into the sheriff's office and ask questions. Alpha met his son's gaze directly. I made a terrible mistake believing what I heard. I have no excuse that will satisfy either of us. Michael turned the key over in his hand, conflict evident in his expression. And now you're back because it's time to face what I left behind, Alpha said simply. Nothing more complicated than that. Pastor Collins cleared his throat. The key is significant, Michael. Someone within the department wants you to find something. Or it's a trap, Julia suggested. The sheriff knows Alpha is back. This could be his way of drawing you both out. Michael studied the key. There's only one way to find out. Breaking into the sheriff's department is a felony, Pastor Collins warned. Not breaking in, Michael corrected. The old evidence room is in the courthouse basement. It's open to the public during business hours. We'd only be accessing a specific locker. Still illegal, Julia pointed out. So is fabricating tax records to steal someone's land, Michael countered. He looked at Alpha. If you're serious about facing the past, this is where it starts. Alpha nodded. When? Tonight, after dark. Michael's expression remained guarded. But understand something. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for my mother, who never stopped believing in you, and for my daughters, who deserve to know the truth about their heritage. I understand, Alpha said quietly. Michael turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sheriff's deputies are watching the ranch and my home. Where are you staying? My truck, mostly. Michael exchanged glances with Julia, some unspoken communication passing between them. She nodded slightly. There's a hunting cabin on the eastern edge of our property, Michael said reluctantly. It's isolated. You can stay there until this is resolved, one way or another. Before Alpha could respond, Michael was gone. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoing through the church. Pastor Collins sighed heavily. It's a start, is it? Alpha wondered aloud, the weight of his son's guarded offer settling on him. 20 years of absence couldn't be bridged in a single conversation, or perhaps ever, but the key might open more than just an evidence locker. It might unlock the path to redemption Alpha had never dared hope for. Julia insisted on driving Alpha to the hunting cabin herself. Michael needs time, she explained, as they followed a narrow dirt road winding through pine forest at the eastern edge of Apache land. 20 years of wandering doesn't vanish in an afternoon. The cabin appeared around a bend, a sturdy one-room structure of weathered logs with a small covered porch. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, evidence someone had prepared for Alpha's arrival. Michael called Luis, Julia said, noticing Alpha's surprise. The old man still has keys to everything on the property. He'll have stocked firewood and basic supplies. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A wood stove provided heat. A propane camp stove offered cooking capability, and a narrow bed with wool blankets promised reasonable sleep. Luis had left a cooler with provisions, sandwiches, fruit, water, and a bottle of whiskey. We'll come for you at 9 tonight, Julia said, turning to leave. Try to rest. It might be a long night, Alpha nodded. Julia. Thank you. She paused at the door. Don't thank me yet. Michael is the deciding vote here, not me. After she left, Alpha explored the cabin that would serve as his temporary sanctuary. On the small table beside the bed sat a framed pencil drawing. not the university diploma from the original plan. The sketch showed the ranch house as it had been 20 years ago, beautifully rendered with attention to every detail, down to the rocking chair on the porch where Sarah had spent summer evenings. In the corner, an artist's signature, Apache, age 15. Alpha touched the glass covering the drawing. His son had talent, the same talent for capturing detail that had made Alpha a skilled tracker and hunter. Some gifts passed through blood without instruction. As afternoon faded to evening, Alpha's restlessness grew. The planned excursion to the courthouse was hours away. The cabin walls seemed to close in around him, filled with questions about his son's life, a life Alpha had missed entirely. Finally, he made a decision. Taking only Sarah's Bible and his truck keys, Alpha drove back toward town. He wouldn't approach Michael directly. That would violate the fragile trust established in Pastor Collins's office. But he needed to see more, to understand the man his son had become. In the gathering dusk, Alpha parked on a side street in a quiet residential neighborhood. From there, he walked 2 blocks until he reached the address Luis had mentioned, a well-maintained craftsman home with green shutters and a wraparound porch. Michael's home. His son's life, built without him, Alpha remained across the street, partially concealed by a large maple. Lights glowed in the windows, silhouettes moving within. Through sheer curtains, he could make out a cozy living room where a small figure, one of his granddaughters, appeared to be dancing or spinning in circles. The front door opened, spilling more light onto the porch. Michael emerged, now changed from scrubs into jeans and a flannel shirt. He carried a young girl on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair for balance. Another identical child followed, clutching a picture book. "Hiya, Daddy," the girl on Michael's shoulders demanded, her voice carrying across the quiet street. Michael obliged, lifting her above his head as she squealed with delight. The second twin tugged at his pants leg. "My turn next." "You promised." "Always fair, always equal," Michael replied, his voice warm with affection. "That's the Apache way." Alpha's chest tightened. The Apache way. Sarah had taught their son family values, even without Alpha present to reinforce them. Julia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Dinner's ready, wild ones. Wash up." The domestic scene unfolded with comfortable familiarity, a family's evening routine. Michael lowering one daughter to give the other her promised turn, Julia corralling them both for hand-washing. The twins' bright laughter punctuating the twilight. This was what Alpha had missed. First steps, first words, school projects and skinned knees, all the ordinary miracles of raising a child into adulthood. And now, the extraordinary gift of seeing that child become a parent himself. As the family disappeared inside, Alpha remained rooted to the spot, witnessing what might have been his life, if not for the Blackwell's deception. The weight of those lost years pressed upon him, heavier than any physical burden he'd carried. For the first time since his return, Alpha questioned his decision to reappear in his son's life. Michael had built something precious here, a family untouched by the shadow that had followed Alpha for 20 years. What right did he have to risk their happiness for his own redemption? The answer came as he turned to leave. Through the front window, he glimpsed a family portrait hanging above the fireplace. Even from a distance, Alpha could see it included Michael, Julia, the twins, and a framed photograph of Sarah, positioned as if watching over them all. But there was a space beside Sarah's image, a deliberate emptiness waiting to be filled. As if, despite everything, Michael had left room for the father who might someday return. Alpha walked back to his truck, his decision crystallizing. He would help Michael unlock whatever secrets the evidence key held. He would ensure the Blackwells could never threaten the Apache family again. But afterward, if Michael asked him to disappear once more, Alpha would honor that wish. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could at least be acknowledged. With hours still remaining before the planned courthouse excursion, Alpha drove aimlessly through the streets of Millwood. The town had changed in his absence, new buildings alongside familiar landmarks, like reading a book where someone had occasionally substituted unfamiliar words in a once memorized passage. Without conscious decision, he found himself turning onto Cemetery Road. The wrought-iron gates of Millwood Cemetery stood open, as they always had during daylight hours. Alpha drove slowly along the narrow paths between gravestones, uncertainty suddenly gripping him. He hadn't asked where Sarah was buried. He had no flowers, no proper words prepared. Near the western edge, beneath a mature oak tree, Alpha spotted a figure standing motionless before a grave. Even from a distance, he recognized his son's posture, shoulders squared, head slightly bowed, hands clasped behind his back. The stance of a man paying respects. Alpha parked some distance away and waited. This moment belonged to Michael alone. Eventually, his son walked back to a vehicle parked near the cemetery chapel. Only after Michael had driven away did Alpha approach the spot where he had stood. Sarah's grave was marked by a simple headstone of polished granite. The inscription read, "Sarah Elizabeth Apache, beloved mother, faithful wife. She kept watch and never lost hope. 1968, 2022, fresh flowers, white roses." Sarah's favorite lay at the base of the stone. Beside them stood a small copper watering can, not the locket from the original plan. Its surface was beautifully etched with wildflowers, the craftsmanship exquisite. Alpha recognized his son's artistic hand in the detailed work. He knelt beside the grave, his fingers brushing the cool stone. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking on her name. 20 years of unspoken words crowded his mind, none adequate for this moment. What could he say that would matter now? That he was sorry? That he had believed the worst instead of having faith in their love? That he had wasted decades they might have shared? "I should have come back sooner," he finally said. "I should have looked harder for the truth. You deserved better than my absence." The watering can gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight. Alpha examined it more closely, noticing that the bottom edge was engraved with small text, "Your watch has ended. Now I stand guard." Michael, a son's promise to his mother. A continuation of Sarah's 2-decade vigil. Alpha sat on the grass beside the grave, suddenly exhausted by grief, long deferred. "He's a good man, our son. Strong, principled. You did that without me." He traced the dates on the headstone. 3 years. If I'd come back just 3 years earlier, his voice faltered. The mathematics of loss were too painful to contemplate. 20 years gone, 3 years too late. Numbers that could never be reconciled. "I've met Julia," he continued after composing himself. "Seen the twins from a distance. They have your smile, Sarah, and the Apache eyes." He smiled faintly. "Our granddaughters. I never thought I'd live to say those words." A breeze rustled the oak leaves overhead, nature's response to his one-sided conversation. Alpha fell silent, letting memories wash over him. Sarah laughing as they danced in their kitchen, Sarah reading quietly by lamplight, Sarah fierce in defense of their land, Sarah believing in him when he had lost faith in himself. "The Blackwells are still trying to take our land," he said finally, using Michael's family as leverage now. "But something's happening tonight. We might finally get proof of what really happened 20 years ago." He picked up the copper watering can, turning it in his hands. The craftsmanship reminded him of the carved animals he'd found in Michael's childhood bedroom, evidence of artistic talent nurtured over years. "I don't know if he'll ever forgive me." "Sarah, I'm not sure he should." Alpha set the watering can carefully back beside the flowers. "But I promise you this, I'll make sure he and his family are safe from the Blackwells. I'll make things right before I leave again." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his soliloquy. Alpha turned, expecting a cemetery caretaker or another visitor coming to pay respects. Instead, he found himself facing Sheriff Wade Blackwell, flanked by 2 deputies, having a nice chat with the deceased. Blackwell's tone was conversational, but his posture communicated clear threat. Touching, really. The prodigal husband returns, 2 decades and 3 years too late. Alpha rose slowly, keeping his hands visible. "This is hallowed ground, Sheriff. Not the place for whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything," Blackwell said, adjusting his hat. "Just paying my respects to a fine lady." Sarah and I had quite a few conversations over the years, especially after she got sick. She was persuadable toward the end. Alpha's jaw tightened. Meaning what exactly? The sheriff smiled thinly. Meaning there might be documents with her signature on them that would surprise you. Amazing what a dying woman will do when she's worried about her son's future. Sarah would never sell to you. Sell? No, Blackwell shrugged. But transfer partial mineral rights in exchange for certain guarantees regarding Michael's legal standing? That's a different matter entirely. Alpha studied the sheriff's face, looking for the lie. Michael would have mentioned this, would he? If he thought his mother had betrayed the Apache legacy. Blackwell's smile widened. Some secrets stay buried, Apache. Like whatever you and my deputy are planning tonight. Alpha kept his expression neutral, though alarm bells rang internally. How did Blackwell know about their courthouse plans? Stay away from the county offices, the sheriff continued. Whatever you think is there isn't, and interfering with official records is a felony, one that would separate Dr. Apache from those adorable little girls for quite some time. He tipped his hat. Enjoy your reunion with Sarah. It's the only one you're going to get. As the sheriff and his deputies retreated to their vehicles, Alpha remained beside Sarah's grave, the copper watering can glinting in the fading light. Michael's promise to stand guard now fell to Alpha as well. Tonight's excursion had just become significantly more dangerous and more necessary. Dust settled over Millwood as Alpha returned to the hunting cabin. The sheriff's warning echoed in his mind. Somehow, Blackwell knew about their planned excursion to the courthouse, which meant either they were being watched more closely than anticipated, or someone had informed him. Alpha built a small fire in the wood stove, the physical task helping to organize his thoughts. If Blackwell knew about tonight's plans, the courthouse would be under surveillance. The risk to Michael had increased exponentially. A vehicle's approach broke the silence, headlights cutting through early evening shadows. Alpha tensed, but recognized Julia's forest green SUV pulling up outside. She wasn't alone. Michael sat in the passenger seat, his expression grave in the dashboard light. They entered without knocking, the urgency of their mission superseding social niceties. Sheriff Blackwell confronted me at the clinic this afternoon, Michael said without preamble. He knows about the key. Said it was stolen from the evidence room last week during renovations. He confronted me at your mother's grave, Alpha replied. Claimed she signed over mineral rights before she died. Michael's eyes flashed with anger. That's a lie. Mom would never... I know, Alpha said quietly. But Blackwell seemed confident. Said there were documents with her signature. Forged, then. Michael paced the small cabin, tension radiating from him. We need to get into that evidence room tonight, before whatever's there disappears permanently. Julia placed a hand on her husband's arm. They'll be watching the courthouse. Wade practically announced it, which means they're protecting something important, Michael insisted. Alpha watched his son, the determination in his stance, the strategic mind working behind those familiar eyes. You have a plan, Michael nodded. The courthouse has a tunnel system from Prohibition days, maintenance access now. Dad and I used to... He stopped, swallowing hard before correcting himself. Lubish and I used it for building repairs when I was helping him summers during high school. The slip, calling Alpha Dad, hung in the air between them. Acknowledged by neither. We'll need a distraction, Alpha said, moving past the moment. Something to draw attention away from the courthouse. Julia pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I may have that covered. Pastor Collins contacted Judge Martinez, the one who witnessed old man Blackwell's confession. He's agreed to meet us at the bank to open the safe deposit box. Tonight, the sheriff will have someone watching the bank too, Michael pointed out. Exactly. Julia smiled grimly. They can't watch both locations with their limited manpower. Wade has 2 deputies total, and they all think the evidence is in the safe deposit box. Alpha nodded appreciatively. While they're focused on the bank, we access the courthouse tunnel. I'll handle the bank distraction, Julia said. Pastor Collins will accompany me. His presence adds legitimacy and protection. Michael turned to Alpha. That leaves you and me for the courthouse. His tone was matter-of-fact. But the implication was significant. Michael was choosing to trust his father with this crucial task. From his pocket, Michael removed not a hunting knife, but a tarnished silver money clip shaped like a horse's head. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the silver worn smooth in places from years of handling. "Mom gave me this when I turned 18. Said it was yours." Alpha took the money clip, memories flooding back. His father had given it to him when he'd earned his first paycheck. Alpha had carried it daily until the day he fled. "I thought it was lost during the escape. She found it in the barn after you left. Kept it all those years, then passed it to me." Michael watched Alpha's face carefully. "She said it was a reminder that you'd always find your way back to what you valued most." Alpha traced the detailed silver work with his thumb. "Sarah always had more faith than I deserved. That remains to be seen." Michael checked his watch. "We need to move. Julia heads to the bank at 9. We'll enter the tunnel at 9:15. By 9:30 we should be in the evidence room." As Julia prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Be careful, both of you." Her gaze lingered on her husband, concern evident. "Always am," Michael assured her. When she was gone, an uncomfortable silence settled between father and son. 20 years of absence couldn't be bridged in a single afternoon, no matter how pressing their shared mission. Michael broke the quiet first. "Before we do this, I need to know something." His voice was steady but strained. "Did you ever try to contact us? Even once?" The question demanded absolute honesty. "Yes. For the first year I wrote letters from different locations, using different names. They all came back undelivered or unanswered. I called once, but the line had been disconnected. The Blackwells intercepted everything," Michael said, his expression hardening. "Mom tried to reach you too. Letters, newspaper ads with coded messages. For years." Alpha's chest tightened with the confirmation of Sarah's efforts. "I should have tried harder. Should have found a way." "Yes, you should have." Michael's bluntness carried no malice, just simple truth. "But what matters now is what we do tonight." He checked his watch again. "It's time." As they headed toward Michael's truck, Alpha noticed his son carried a small backpack. "What's in the bag?" Michael's expression remained neutral. "Insurance, in case things go wrong." Alpha recognized the response for what it was: partial truth, partial deflection. After 20 years of absence, he hadn't earned his son's complete trust. That would take more than a single night's cooperation, but it was a start. A fragile beginning that could still shatter under the weight of whatever truth waited in the old evidence locker. The courthouse of Millwood County stood silhouetted against the night sky, its Victorian architecture a reminder of more prosperous times. Michael parked 3 blocks away, in the shadow of an abandoned feed store. They walked separately, approaching from different directions, Michael from the east, Alpha from the west, to avoid drawing attention if anyone was watching. They reunited at a nondescript maintenance door, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs behind the courthouse. Michael produced a key from his pocket. Luis kept this after his retirement. Said he never trusted the Blackwells with complete access to any building. The heavy door opened with a reluctant groan. They slipped inside, closing it behind them. Michael switched on a flashlight, revealing a narrow tunnel with rough stone walls and a low ceiling. Pipes and electrical conduits ran overhead, modern utilities following ancient pathways. "This way," Michael whispered, leading Alpha deeper into the labyrinth. The tunnel connects to the courthouse basement. The old evidence room is there, separate from the modern facility. They moved in silence, the beam of Michael's flashlight their only guide. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of old stone and damp earth. After several minutes of careful navigation, they reached another door, steel with a combination lock. Michael worked the dial by flashlight, muttering numbers under his breath. "Luis made sure I memorized this. Said someday it might matter." The lock surrendered with a click. Beyond lay the courthouse basement, a warren of storage rooms and forgotten archives. There, Michael pointed to a heavy wooden door with evidence stenciled in faded letters. "That's the old repository. Everything before the digital system was implemented in 2010. The brass key from Michael's mailbox fit perfectly. The door swung open to reveal rows of metal lockers and filing cabinets, artifacts from a pre-digital age. "We're looking for locker 734, Michael said, studying the numbers. "That's the number engraved on the key's shaft. They found it in the back corner, a tall, narrow locker secured with another key lock. The brass key turned smoothly, as if recently oiled. Inside waited a single cardboard box, labeled Apache Incident, June 2005. Michael lifted it carefully, placing it on a dusty desk nearby. Inside lay several evidence bags and folders. He methodically examined each one, laying them out in sequence. The first contained Alpha's bloody shirt, preserved in plastic, the shirt he'd worn the day of the confrontation with Jacob Blackwell. The second held spent shell casings. The third, a ballistics report contradicting the official finding that Alpha's gun had fired the shot that wounded Jacob Blackwell. "This proves the bullet didn't come from your weapon," Michael said, studying the report. "The rifling patterns don't match. You didn't shoot him at all." Alpha examined the report. "Then whose gun fired the shot?" Michael opened the fourth evidence bag. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a silver cigarette case, not the will and testament from the original plan. Its surface was dented in one corner, and a dark stain marred its otherwise polished finish. "This was in your shirt pocket when you fled," Michael said. "Mom always wondered what happened to it. Her father gave it to you as a wedding gift." Alpha took the cigarette case with reverent hands. He remembered it clearly, a treasured possession he'd carried daily. "The stain, blood," Michael confirmed. "Yours, according to the evidence tag. And this is why," he pointed to a small, perfectly round hole in the case. "The cigarette case stopped a bullet meant to kill you, Dad." The words slipped out naturally this time, without self-correction. Alpha looked up, meeting his son's eyes. Michael continued, his voice steadier now. "The fifth evidence bag contains a bullet extracted from the tree behind where you stood. And the final report," he held up a ballistics analysis, "confirms it was fired from Sheriff Blackwell Sr.'s service weapon. The same bullet that hit this case before deflecting into the tree. They tried to kill me," Alpha said quietly, "then covered it up when I escaped, and framed you for attempting to kill Jacob." Michael nodded. "All to force Mom to sell the ranch once you were gone?" The implications settled over them both. Alpha hadn't shot anyone. The confrontation had been orchestrated from the beginning, a setup designed to eliminate him, leaving his wife and infant son vulnerable. "Sheriff Blackwell Sr. fired at me, using the confrontation with Jacob as cover," Alpha pieced together. "Jacob was in on it, faked being hit when his father's shot missed me. And when you ran, they spread rumors that you'd killed us too." Michael's expression hardened. "But they didn't count on Mom's determination, or the evidence preserved here." A sound from the tunnel interrupted their discovery, footsteps approaching. Michael quickly gathered the evidence, stuffing it back into the box. From his backpack, he withdrew a small digital camera and methodically photographed each item before replacing it. "We need to go," Alpha whispered urgently. "Not yet." Michael removed a final item from his backpack, a sealed envelope. "This was in our mailbox with the key. I didn't show it to you earlier because I wasn't sure I could trust you." Alpha took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten confession from Jacob Blackwell, dated just 2 weeks earlier. It detailed the entire conspiracy, the fabricated cattle rustling accusations, the planned ambush, the attempt on Alpha's life, and the subsequent cover-up. It was signed and notarized. "Jacob is dying of cancer," Michael explained quickly. "Looks like he's clearing his conscience." The footsteps grew louder. Michael secured the box back in the locker, locking it. "We have what we need now. Evidence that clears your name and implicates the current sheriff in the conspiracy." As they slipped out through a different corridor, Alpha clutched the silver cigarette case that had unknowingly saved his life 20 years ago. The small dent where the bullet had struck was tangible proof of how close he'd come to death, and how different his family's life might have been if the shot had found its intended target. By saving his life, The silver case had ironically condemned him to 20 years of exile, and now it offered him a chance at redemption. Dawn broke over the Apache ranch, painting the mountains gold and casting long shadows across land that had witnessed generations of both conflict and peace. Alpha sat on the porch steps of the main house, watching the sunrise, a simple pleasure he'd nearly forgotten during 20 years of exile. The previous night's escape from the courthouse had been narrow but successful. They'd emerged from a maintenance exit just as Sheriff Blackwell's patrol car pulled up to the main entrance. Alerted by whoever had been following them in the tunnel, Julia had created the perfect distraction at the bank. With Pastor Collins and Judge Martinez in tow, she'd made quite a scene about accessing the safe deposit box, ensuring every deputy in Blackwell's limited force was occupied there. By midnight, the evidence photos had been transmitted to the State Attorney General's office, along with Jacob Blackwell's notarized confession. By 2 a.m., the Attorney General had called Michael personally, promising immediate action. By dawn, arrest warrants were being prepared for Sheriff Wade Blackwell and 2 county officials implicated in the conspiracy. The screen door creaked behind Alpha. Michael emerged with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to his father before settling beside him on the steps. They sat in companionable silence, watching the day brighten across their land. "What happens now?" Alpha finally asked. Michael sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "The Attorney General's investigators arrived this afternoon. They'll want statements from both of us." He paused. "After that, I suppose that depends on you." The question lingered unspoken between them. Would Alpha stay or disappear again once his name was cleared? Before Alpha could respond, the distant sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. 3 vehicles crested the hill, Sheriff Blackwell's patrol car leading, followed by 2 unmarked sedans. "Earlier than expected," Michael murmured. Standing, they watched as the small convoy stopped at the gate, not the rebuilt ranch gate from the original plan, but something even more significant. There, half buried in the earth beside the entrance, stood a massive granite boulder. Decades earlier, Alpha's grandfather had carved the family brand into its surface, marking Apache territory for all who entered. The stone had stood sentinel through generations of Apache ranchers, witnessing arrivals and departures, celebrations and sorrows. Now it would witness one more crucial moment in family history. Michael and Alpha walked down to meet the vehicles, side by side. Julia joined them from the house, the twins safely inside with Luis watching over them. Sheriff Blackwell emerged from his patrol car, face tight with controlled anger. From the sedans stepped men and women in suits, state law enforcement officials, badges visible. "Dr. Apache," the sheriff began formally, "I have eviction papers here, signed by Judge Wilson. Your property taxes remain delinquent despite multiple notices. The county is exercising its right to reclaim the land." He extended an official-looking document, his expression triumphant despite the state officials watching nearby. Michael made no move to accept the papers. Instead, he looked toward the lead state investigator. As discussed on the phone, Sheriff Blackwell is attempting to execute the final stage of a 20-year conspiracy to illegally seize my family's property. The investigator nodded. "Sheriff Wade Blackwell, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraud. Please surrender your weapon and badge." Blackwell's face flushed crimson. "This is absurd. These men broke into county property last night to recover evidence that had been illegally concealed," the investigator finished calmly. "Evidence that proves Alpha Apache never shot Jacob Blackwell, and that your father attempted to murder Mr. Apache as part of a conspiracy to seize this land." As 2 agents moved to take the sheriff into custody, he reached inside his jacket. Alpha tensed, anticipating a weapon, but instead Blackwell withdrew the Morgan silver dollar he'd shown Alpha days earlier. "This was supposed to be lucky," Blackwell said bitterly, staring at the coin. "My father said it would bring our family prosperity once the Apaches were gone." "That coin belongs to my family," Alpha said quietly. Blackwell's hand tightened around it. Then, with sudden viciousness, he hurled it toward the granite boulder. The silver dollar struck the stone and fell into the tall grass beside it. As the agents led Blackwell away, Alpha approached the boulder. Kneeling in the grass, he searched until his fingers closed around the familiar shape of his grandfather's lucky coin. When he stood, Michael was beside him. "That belonged to your great-grandfather," Alpha said, offering the coin to his son. "It should stay in the family." Michael studied the silver dollar, then carefully placed it in his pocket. "We have a lot to talk about, Dad. 20 years' worth." "I know." Alpha gazed back at the house, at Julia watching from the porch, at the small faces of his granddaughters peeking through the window. "I don't expect forgiveness, Michael, or a place here. But I'd like a chance to know my grandchildren, if you'll allow it." Michael was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he placed his hand on the carved surface of the boulder, tracing the Apache brand with his fingers. "This stone marks our family's claim to this land," he said finally. "Grandfather told me once that as long as it stands, there will always be Apaches here." He looked at his father directly. "The twins need to know their heritage. All of it, including you. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, a possibility Alpha had never dared hope for." As they walked back toward the house together, the morning sun fully illuminated the land that had defined both their lives. The ranch remained what it had always been, not just property to be defended, but the physical embodiment of a family's legacy. And for the first time in 20 years, all of that family was home.